Hey, welcome to DC Signal to Noise. Welcome back. Welcome to a new year, Jim. It's been a while.
It's been since last year.
It has been. And hey, we got another box on our Brady Bunch here.
Hey, we have a guest who really knows what he's talking about. Hopefully, he'll give us signals and not noise.
We'll see.
I've never known John Doggett, CEO of the National Corn Growers Association, to give us anything but signal, both here and on AgriTalk and on AgWeb and elsewhere every time we've talked to him. So appreciate you making time for us today, John, on some late notice.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And I tell you what, after this week, I'm just glad to be any place. And it's good to be with you, and I appreciate the invite.
Thank you. And this your first time here doing this with us live, so we'll do a little pre-show here and then go into the recording. But folks are on the line with us in this little pre-show area, where, as always, we invite your questions, particularly with John here. Certainly we'll be talking about ethanol and some of the priorities coming into the new year. But also the main reason we want to have John on is that we've been hearing from him that the Biden team has been reaching out to ag groups unlike any other incoming administration. So we want to get into some details of that and hear from John firsthand what's been going on and what that means for agriculture moving into this new administration. So we'll get into that. But anything's fair game. If there's something you want to hear us talk about, drop us a note there in comments and we'll get it on the list. And sometimes we don't know anything about it. We'll tell you that, but usually we'll find out something about it. Either within the show or by next week's show. So drop us a comment, let us know, and I appreciate that. Happy New Year from our friends listening on LinkedIn. So drop a comment, let us know. We've got kind of a list together, things we're going to talk about. Obviously, we'll get into the events of this week in Washington, some reaction to that and what that means to things moving forward. As we've mentioned, we went to John about the interaction of ag groups with the incoming Biden administration. And along those same lines, Jim, this morning on AgriTalk, on that discussion, you and Chip made some comments about how fortunate we are, given the current environment, that it's Tom Vilsack coming back to USDA. So we'll talk about some of the impact of that. There's going to be a push for $2,000, the rest of the $2,000 proposed stimulus or stimulus payments for coronavirus. Is ag looking for anything in that? We'll get details from you on that, Jim. And of course, as I mentioned, we're going to talk ethanol and other corn grower issues with John Doggett here, CEO of the Corn Growers. So anything else you guys would like to add to the list, John or Jim?
That's a pretty big list. We'll ask John climate change from the corn producers' perspective, timeline, and kind of their priorities on that for sure. Since we have him online.
One of the other things I'd like us to talk about a little bit is there's still some bipartisanship in Washington, D.C., and I think we need to shine a light on that wherever we can. We've had some good conversations with folks on both sides of the aisle and together, and I'd like to talk about that a bit as well.
Sure.
Excellent. All right. Well, then let's get to it. Here comes countdown in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Friday. Welcome to DC Signal. Thank you for joining us here in the new year. And as always, plenty to talk about. Some we want to talk about, a lot we don't want to talk about, but we're going to talk about anyways, right, Jim Wiesmeyer?
Yes, as usual.
As usual. And we've got a special guest with us this week, John Doggett, CEO of the National Corn Growers Association, with some exciting news about interaction with the new Biden administration, but amongst other topics we're going to talk about. John, thanks for joining us today.
Boy, it's good to be with you. It really is. Thanks.
All right. Well, let's get right down to it. And let's start with the biggest news of the week, and that is the events in Washington Wednesday and still ongoing. First, I'm just going to open it up to you, Jim, first, and then John, your reaction, your thoughts, what you want to express about what has transpired this week.
Well, it was a tragedy. There was a crime scene at the Capitol, unlike we've ever seen, and it's unfortunate, big time. And there will be repercussions. It's made a very volatile issue even more so, but it really, emphasizes the need, as John said earlier, for the return of bipartisanship to as many of the areas that we can possibly get. But it was a very ugly situation brought on by a host of events, and I've never seen a president crater as fast as President Trump has. So that those are the initial bottom lines here. But let's hope we've turned the curve to the positive side, John.
It really is remarkable how an event that Donald Trump thought was going to strengthen his position has really tremendously weakened his position, not only in his remaining 13 days in office, but really prospects for control of the Republican Party from here on out. John Doggett, your thoughts on what's happened?
I've been thinking a lot since Wednesday. I started my career in Washington in February of 1988. Ronald Reagan was the president. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. Robert Byrd was the majority leader. I remember the first time I walked into the Capitol with my boss, Congressman Marlene, and I've been in the Capitol building in the ensuing 32 years hundreds of times. And I've always approached it with a bit of awe, a real recognition of the importance and the symbols of that great building. And I was just heartsick and angry on Wednesday. And I think we're all still trying to grapple with this, what it means and what it says about us. And a lot of finger pointing is going to happen, but I think some of the finger pointing ought to be directed back to each of us as individuals. We need to be better committed to this democracy than maybe we have been.
And I'd add committed to truth and finding that universal truth and admitting that there is a universal truth and that we can't each just live in our own opinion from here on out. Something I've heard of interest this week to me, as someone who's spent a fair amount of time off and on visiting DC, and heard from others that are there intermittently like that, saying that have been there recently, saying that the city is very different than what I would remember, not only from the events of Wednesday, but also the events of the summer and the shutdowns of coronavirus is really made it a very physically different city than what most of us would remember there.
It's all of that, and you see all of the businesses that are, shuttered, probably will never come back because of the pandemic. A lot of people out of work, these moratoriums on foreclosures and evictions. When all that ends, we're going to have, not only in Washington, but around the country, some really difficult things we're going to have to deal with. It's a different city in Washington, but Washington's a resilient city. It is a city that has come back from a lot of different things. And I was reminding my staff this morning about, I remembered when I was 12 years old, 1968. Washington burned after Martin Luther King was killed April the 6th of 1968. Washington burned. A lot of people died. We came back from that. We can come back. This is America. This is the land of second opportunities.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that, because before we started recording in the pre-show, and again, I would invite folks who are just listening on the podcast. We record this live 2:00 every Friday afternoon, and you can join the conversation live on the AgriTalk Facebook page. You just listen to the podcast next week. Join us live at 2 Eastern on the AgriTalk Facebook page, and you can send us questions in real time. In fact, let's acknowledge a couple of the comments coming in. Terry Hutton saying, "Yes, we are all responsible." We all just agreed wholeheartedly to that. Dana saying, "Rabid politics, had no business in family farming, never did. Minute one, that man's Warhawk ways fad never belonged in our agriculture. He was unfit day one." I appreciate those comments coming in. Day and I disagree with a little bit, that I think all of us, either that opposed Donald Trump or embraced Donald Trump, had hopes from day one that there would be a successful presidency, as we all hope come January 20th, there will be a successful presidency with Joe Biden. It has just turned out that it is a very, very unfortunate and unpatriotic ending to this presidency here in the last few days. But let's turn a little more positive, because John, you said there are real signals of bipartisanship in this seemingly fractured Washington, D.C.
You know, I do a podcast for the corn growers, and we do it monthly. And we did a podcast with two members of the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House of Representatives, Dusty Johnson, a Republican from South Dakota, and Abigail Spanberger, a Democrat from Virginia. They're members of this caucus, equally divided between Republicans and Democrats. And they're up to about 50 members now. And they are committed to finding problems in the middle. You know, really, America works best when we do our politics between the 40-yard lines. And the Problem Solvers Caucus and other activities are really helpful. We're seeing an emergence of a kind of a loose-knit coalition of moderates from both parties in the Senate. And, you know, if you can get 8, 10, 12 members of the Senate to be unified in the middle, that's going to move things a lot. And I think that gives me some optimism for the future.
Yeah, I encourage folks to check out the Wherever John May Roam podcast out there. Give that a listen every month, because there's a lot of great information like that in that interview that you just mentioned. I mean, that Problem Solvers Caucus, they were the ones that brought us to, it wasn't perfect, but brought us to a coronavirus aid package just before the last Congress recessed. So they are doing good work. Question from Gary, something you and I have discussed previously, Jim, and that is, does Joe Manchin still switch party possibly? And is he the most powerful man in D.C.? Well, the answer to the second question is, if he's not the most, he's up there right now. He's going to get a lot of, West Virginia's going to get a lot of infrastructure over at least the next couple of years, which would lead me to say, no, he doesn't change party, Jim. Wouldn't he lose party if he changed party at this point?
Well, he can yield a lot of power, staying right where he's at. Of course, I think they tried behind the scenes, but, you know, we're seeing his importance reflected just today, if the wire surfaces are correct, where, you know, Senator Manchin came out and said he will not support the $2,000 payment, bill. Now, that doesn't mean Republicans won't. Enough Republicans will I think will join that cause, but it shows that with so tight Senate 50-50, with the Democrats controlling it because of the vice president, and the House, the narrowest margin since the 1940s, you're going to have compromise. So that might play into what John was saying, to get a lot of things done. I think the best and easiest way would be to compromise between the two parties. It can still be done.
It can be. And I think in some ways what has happened this week might foster some more of that. I mean, you are going to see some hardening of positions on the fringes, but I think there are a lot more being brought into the middle to try to combat some of that. Just a couple final thoughts on Wednesday before we move on. I'll let you guys chime in too on this if you have anything to add. But number one, I think it is of utmost importance for us and everyone else to say strongly, there is no evidence of any sort of election irregularity of a scale that would impact the outcome certified by the 50 states in this presidential election. Joe Biden is the legitimate next president of the United States. That certification in no way should have held up the ultimate certification in Congress of Joe Biden's win. But I do think, and Jim, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, and John, I do think that Congress needs to follow up with some sort of evaluation of election security and the election process, if nothing else, than to build confidence in the integrity of public elections being held by the states. Yeah,
there should be some type of bipartisan commission with elders of both parties. Mm-hmm. An excellent example is to bring back already Pat Roberts, who just retired from Kansas, Colin Peterson from Minnesota, and other lawmakers of that ilk who are fair minded. And yeah, I do think that they're usually most blue ribbon commissions is just covering up, but this one would be airing some very sensitive issues out, and I think the American public needs it.
John, anything you want to add on that?
Sure, and I think that's a great idea. One of the things I would suggest that they do if they're going to put together a commission is let's get local election officials. When I vote here in Northern Virginia, the folks that are running that election over here at the local school, they're my friends and my neighbors. I know a lot of them. And,
right.
and the fact that we think that some of those folks are stealing an election, that's crazy. But I think they have a voice, because we have tens of thousands of these very good Americans who go and they work at the polls and they count the votes and they help us organize the lines. And this last year, they had to make sure everybody was wearing masks. Those are important people to have, because our elections in this country have long been under the control of local officials and state officials. Do we really want to have federalized elections? I don't think we do. I think we want to devolve that very important part of our democracy to as low a level as we possibly can, because those are the folks that, one, do the work, and two, I think that we can trust.
Well, that brings a great deal of security to our election system, that it is so disparate. There is no central place to impact the election vote. And I think we need to do some educating about our election process, because I don't think a lot of people understand. I've worked as an election judge. I have seen it firsthand. There is a Republican and a Democrat with eyes on those ballots at every moment. This is not something that someone can go in and easily manipulate tens of thousands of votes at a single time. It would be very, very difficult to do in the way that our votes are processed, because we do have local control of how that balloting is done. So all good points there, John. Appreciate it. Well, let's move on to some other things. And let's get to the issue at hand of inviting you on here, John, and that is the interaction with the Biden administration. I've got to admit, I was behind the scenes on the technical side when you were on with Chip Flory a couple weeks ago, and broke the news that Michael Regan, the designated to be EPA administrator, on the night before he was nominated officially, calls you out of the blue. It wasn't a planned phone call, just out of the blue, calls your cell phone and wants to know how EPA can work with growers. Tell us about what was in that call.
First, John, is it Regan or Reagan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I have heard him say it Reagan. So.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. All right.
Well,
in YouTube recordings, I should say.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting call, and you get those calls in the evening, and you don't recognize the number, and you almost
didn't answer, didn't you?
No, I really did, and I there's something, God was with me, and I answered, and he said, "Hi, this is Michael Regan, and the President-elect Biden is going to name me tomorrow, and I really want to hear from you and kind of what's going on with you guys. And I know ethanol is important. We had a conversation about that, a short one. I pointed out that not only is ethanol important to the corn growers, but it's important to those rural communities out there. That ethanol plant at the edge of town is generating some economic activity in parts of the country that really need some economic activity, and he understood that. The second thing that we talked about was that Joe Biden and the Democrats are going to be pushing hard on climate change legislation, and I told him we can be part of the solution in agriculture, but we can't if you take away our tools, if you take away the technology, and if you don't find ways to bring more tools and technologies to that farm field. And if we lose GMOs, if we lose glyphosate, we set back our ability to affect climate change to a point where we're not even close to being part of the solution.
And what did he comment, John, or not? How did he respond?
Well, obviously he's got to be very circumspect, as all nominees or potential nominees. You don't want to say something that becomes one of those gotcha questions in a hearing. But No, he listened, and he said about 3 times, we need to make sure we're talking to one another. And I have found, being a lobbyist for 30 years, if I get an opportunity to be in front of a policymaker and make my case, that's the biggest hurdle I have to overcome, is getting into that room and having that ear. If we can do that, we have a great story to tell in American agriculture, and I'm very proud of the organization I work for. We've done a lot in these areas, and we have this great story, and I'm just delighted we're going to have some opportunities to tell it.
Yeah, you mentioned getting in that room and having that ear. There have been times when you've been in that room speaking, but haven't necessarily had that ear. But the sense I get, not just from you, but from others who have worked with Michael Reagan in his home state of North Carolina. In fact, we're going to have Ray Starling, who's a former White House ag advisor, and is now working with the North Carolina Chamber. He's going to be on AgriTalk later this week to talk about some of those interactions. But it does seem like you are in the room with him, and he is actively listening.
Well, that's the sense I get. Is we're going to have a much better ability to talk to EPA than we've had, not just the last 4 years, but maybe the last, I don't know, a long, long time. So looking forward to it.
Let me get your reaction, though, on another appointment coming in. That's Gina McCarthy, which, we think back to sometimes that ag has been talking but haven't had the year. I think there have been some instances in her tenure at EPA where that was the case. Do you have concerns about Gina McCarthy being in that position as the domestic climate advisor for the White House and driving climate policy across all federal agencies?
Well, the big difference between the job she had and the job she's going to get is the job she had as the head of EPA. That it's not only making policy, but it's implementing policy. In the role she's going to have, that's to advise the president on policy. Very different functions. And I think it's significant that they're different functions. So we will continue to approach Gina McCarthy like we have in the past. She's approachable. We've had a lot of discussions, and some of them haven't been happy talk, but we'll have some more discussions with her. But I think she's going to be an advisory role rather than an implementation role, and I think that we need to mark the difference there.
Yeah. Have any of your cohorts had similar calls from Biden administration officials leading up to this transition?
Sure, and I know that Sippy Duvall got a call. I believe Rob LaRue got a call. There are others in the ag space that have had calls, but from somebody like a Michael Regan. But what's really interesting is our DC staff, not only Brooke Appleton, our VP, who runs the office, but the directors in the office are getting calls from the transition teams. So it's not just, it's not the CEO level or the president's level. It's at a director level. And that really places me because, those are the folks that do the work. I'm just the pretty face. But I'm glad that they're doing that over and over again. I don't know how many calls I've been on with those folks, and I know that the rest of the folks on my staff have been having similar calls. So it's really good, and I know that other organizations are having similar conversations.
And John, this is part of their outreach, policy during the transition. And I was told this morning that similar types of calls are being made by officials, including the nominee for the Labor Department, on sensitive labor issues, and hopefully that includes the ag groups as well.
Has to for agriculture, and folks say, well, corn isn't dependent on labor. We definitely are dependent on labor. All we had to do is see what happened when the meat packing plants shut down back in April. We're dependent on labor. And there's a lot of problems to be solved there.
What kind of questions are you guys getting from the transition team?
A lot around climate change. And, we've put together this soil health partnership, started about 5 years ago. We're gathering a lot of data from a couple hundred farms across the country on soil health. That is something they've asked us about, and how can we take the data from there and contribute some knowledge to the discussions around climate change. But they're asking us a lot of questions about production practices. One of the things that I tell folks, not only in the transition team, but everybody, our first vice president, Chris Edgington, who farms in Iowa, says a lot, and I agree with him. If you haven't been on a corn farm in the last 5 years, you haven't been on a corn farm. And I when people tell me about all the terrible things that the corn industry has done, oftentimes they're talking about what happened in the 70s. And so I hold out this little instrument here and say, what did your cell phone look like in 1979? Well, I didn't have a cell phone. Why do you think technology only exists in cell phones? It doesn't. The technology our farmers are using is astounding, and they're using more of it all the time, and they're using it better. If we can just keep convincing policymakers that what we're doing and the innovation that we have in these farms is going to solve problems. It's not problems to be solved. We're solving problems.
Yeah, I'd like to get both of your reaction to a comment that just came in from Richard on the comments. And again, if you have a comment or question, drop it there in the comment section on Facebook. Richard says, buckle down, fellow farmers. This is not going to be good. I would say, too, one, there is reason to be wary because of where we've been in the past. And we do need to keep a very wary eye on where this administration is headed on climate. But I would say if that is your only reaction to this, you are going to likely miss out on opportunities for revenue in this administration. And John, I'd like to get your reaction to that first, and then Jim.
Well, as you know, I worked for the American Farm Bureau for 11 years. I was the lead lobbyist on climate change back in the days when we were pushing back against cap and trade. This is not that discussion. That is not on the table. What's on the table?
That's good to hear.
Yeah,
that is very good to hear.
It's not on the table. Who's pushing for credits, carbon credits? It's private industry. We need to facilitate that, and we need to be at the table. The most important thing that we're going to see in this climate discussion is a discussion around opportunity for farmers. We have to be at the table, and we can't open up our negotiations and our discussions with the administration by saying you guys are going to be bad for us and cross our arms. That's not going to work. We have to be involved, and the most important thing in this discussion from our perspective at the National Corn Growers is let's make sure that the benefits that accrue from this legislation or whatever happens in Washington, let's make sure those benefits devolve to the farmer at the fork of the creek that is doing the things on his or her farm that reduces the carbon in the atmosphere. Those folks are doing great things. They need to be acknowledged, and they need to continue. They need to get incentives, and they need to get the financial benefits that are going to accrue. I don't want big corporations to benefit from a climate change regime that involves the buying and the selling of credits without farmers getting those payments.
Well, farmers and ranchers should be at least skeptical at the front end. There's no problem with that. But as John says, you have to be at the table. And I do think the Obama administration learned a lot of lessons, and Biden, of course, part of that, of how not to do it. And the emails and calls I have received over the last 6 months or so on this issue from farmers and ranchers is, number one, they want it to be voluntary, not mandatory. Number two, they want to be inclusive in the payment structures, with John says. And three, they don't want to have it like it was before. So, and I think that's what John, was indicating. On ProFarmer.com, this morning, I highlighted what I thought was the most important item I saw today in the New York Times by Andrew Sorkin. He's a deal book writer there, and I behoove all of you to call it up. It was a profile of a data company called Grow Intelligence, and they're going to be key involved in this because, to make a long story short, their indexes are going to be used to build an array of markets in this area, including agriculture. And their CEO, Sarah Menker, is a former Morgan Stanley commodities trader, so she knows the impact there. And on their board is Gary Cohen, the former Goldman Sachs president and Trump economic advisor. So this is the good things I see. At least they're manning up to get the data. What are the possibilities? And another thing, John, that I want you to comment on, what farmers have been telling me, they want some legacy initiatives, that farmers who have already utilized best practices to be compensated for that are be part of the new program.
Well, that is a comment that I made to Michael Regan the other day. And I hear it a lot from our growers, and that is, I've been doing no-till for a long, long time. I may have, maximized the amount of carbon I can put in my soil. I need to have some recognition for that. And as I told Secretary Regan the other day, if you exclude the good actors, the folks that have been doing the right thing all these years, you exclude all the good actors, all you got left are the bad actors. That's not who you want to deal with. You want to deal with the folks that have made a commitment to doing the right thing, not just last week, last month, last crop year, but for decades. And he understood that because if you exclude them, I know one way you can go ahead and fix all that real fast. Let's go back to a mold bore plow for 2 years and then start all over. That's not where we want to go. And we're not going to advocate for that. But I'm with Jim. I mean, what I've heard from farmers over the last year is a completely different discussion around climate than we had 5, 6, 10, 15 years ago. It's completely different, and a much, much more acceptance and much more the realization that there's some opportunity here. Will it be perfect? Guess what? It won't be. But you know what? We can make it pretty darn good if we work at it.
On that sentiment is being reflected by comment here from Dana. Farmers have green agendas. Last I checked, are we dropping the stewards of the earth mantra? I think that's probably right on there. Appreciate the comment. Some other questions coming in about livestock and dairy. We'll get to those in just a little bit. But John, while we're on to this climate discussion, I wanted to ask you what kind of reception you're getting about the effort that corn growers, Renewable Fuels Association, Growth Energy, other groups are putting forward about ethanol's role in driving this climate agenda, and quite frankly, being a much faster way of lowering carbon load through transportation than it could be more quickly and more efficiently than what's being promoted for electric vehicles, and probably more realistically too.
Right. Short term and longer term. We have some short-term opportunities in places like California. Mary Nichols, the head of CARB, California Air Resources Board, the conversations we've had with her and her staff in the last 2 years has been completely different than the conversations we had years before that. She understands now that the more ethanol you put in liquid fuels in California, the faster you can drive down the carbon footprint for transportation. She gets that. Her folks get that. We're trying to get into the California market with an expansion of the use of ethanol. That's going to take some more time, but I think we can get that done. Secondly, we're going to have a need for octane in this country. As we push for cars to have better gas mileage, we're going to see higher compression engines. At least we hope we have higher compression engines that will need octane, and obviously ethanol is a big part of that. And that's why we are pushing for the Next Generation Fuels Act, which was introduced by Sherry Bustos in the last Congress. Will be reintroduced hopefully fairly quickly here, but incentivizes and pushes to get that high octane fuel into the system. Longer term, we have such a great story to tell with ethanol, and it starts at the farm. It starts with how that producer raises that crop all the way to how the plant processes it, how all of that is transported. All of that is just so much more efficient than it ever was before. I dare say that we could say that if we could include a greater amount of ethanol in the nation's fuel system, we could do a lot more for the environment than electric cars.
In order to do that, though, you're going to have to work hand in hand with the oil industry, and that has been a very fractured relationship, to put it mildly. But the oil industry really relies on the ethanol industry at this point to extend their longevity. I think there is going to be a compromise found there that'll let those two industries work together.
We have reached out to the petroleum industry. They keep telling me they don't like mandates. We're going to have a mandate pretty soon, and it won't be good for those that produce liquid motor fuels. And I think they need to be looking at what we're going to do. I don't think that the big companies or the big associations are doing much, but I see a lot from individual companies. But we would really like to see the petroleum industry be more willing to sit down and have a conversation with the ethanol industry. It's unfortunate we can't seem to get that done.
John, how does this mesh into the coming debate on the future of the Renewable Fuel Standard program?
I think, I was looking back a couple months ago at some of the stuff we did back in the early 2000s, and when we did the first and then the second RFS. We had signs and ads that we were doing about who do you want to be looking to for your energy needs. You want the American farmer, or do you want Saddam Hussein? Saddam Hussein's been dead for quite a while. We're now energy independent. We were not back then. So we're going to have to sell this a different way. And certainly the low carbon, high octane arguments are good arguments, and they're legitimate arguments, and ones that I think we can hang our hat on. We're not going to give up the RFS until we have something better in hand.
Well, and 313 mile an hour speed records out in Nevada with a streetcar don't hurt the image of ethanol either.
No, they don't.
So let's have more of those go. All right, let's change gears just a little bit and talk a little more about this transition. We hinted at it earlier that we want to talk about Tom Vilsack coming back to USDA. Jim, you said this morning, because of the turmoil with the transition right now, that's probably very good news for USDA that it is Tom Vilsack coming back in that position. That certainly brings a great deal of stability for the agency.
Yes, it does. And he knows where the people are, the career people, the excellent career people. He knows how to tap them initially until he can get his people on board. He's well familiar of dealing with the liaison with Congress when he needs to. And of course, he knows the corridors of the White House. And if my sources are correct, he is very close to incoming President Joe Biden. And so I think he's going to have, in addition to his ag portfolio, a very, a confidential assistant, if you will, to President-elect Joe Biden on a host of other areas. To give you my opinion, I think he's a transition USDA secretary that may even have a higher office in the Biden administration in the next few years. But that's getting ahead of ourselves.
Wow. Well, first, John, I'll let you react to what Jim just said.
Oh, I think Jim's spot on. You don't need to draw Tom Vilsack any stickman figures as to how to run USDA. He understands that. The other thing is, and Jim alluded to it, we all owe Tom Vilsack a debt of gratitude, because when he was the secretary of the Obama administration, there were a number of just dumb ideas that were coming out of the West Wing. And Tom Vilsack stopped a lot of those. Didn't stop all of them, but he did a great job in going to the president and saying, this doesn't work for rural America. This doesn't work for farmers and ranchers. Leave these things alone. And his good relationship with Joe Biden, I think, will allow him to continue to do that. And we need to support him in when he does.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that went on in the Obama administration, when Tom Vilsack was USDA secretary, that people don't know about, where Tom Vilsack really went to bat for agriculture. You hit on those. And I think it's also important to note that Tom Vilsack did have his voice heard about issues surrounding the RFS and around WOTUS. Now, he ultimately didn't win the day all the time on those, but he did have impact on how those came out. And he was able to be heard on those issues and how they impacted agriculture. And I think, as Jim noted, he'll be able to do that even more so because of his relationship with Joe Biden.
Yeah, because you learn from being in government. So he doesn't have to go through that learning curve whatsoever. So he'll be efficient. He'll be able to tap officials, and several of the officials in the Obama administration are coming back in, and he already knows them. He doesn't have to even introduce himself, and that's all pluses. Now, again, it's not going to be all rosy because of he's going to have to follow suit on certain initiatives because he is a team player, but he knows production agriculture now. So, that's his, I think that's his biggest advantage right now. He knows the risk and reward in agriculture, that with any regulation, there's a risk. And as long as there's more benefits than not, it's okay. If not, why are you doing it? And I think he learned that.
Jim, what do you think his top priorities are going to be coming in here in just over a week?
Well, I think short and longer term, it's on the climate change arena. I think that's one of the reasons he accepted to come back, other than his personal friend, the incoming president, asking him to. The second one is when you hear all the cabinet people that Biden has proposed, not just one, almost everyone mentions climate change in their acceptance speeches, but also in the racial area. And of course, he's got some history of having to deal with some sensitivities in that within USDA. So that's going to be near his top spot as well. And when he was in the last time, the food policy arena was, in his bucket, and I don't see that changing as well.
Yeah, you're right. The issue of race in USDA and in agriculture seems to feel like unfinished business for him. But he seems genuinely energized, John, to be taking on climate in his second run at USDA secretary.
Absolutely, and we had Tom Vilsack on an effort that we started up last spring on short-term demand with our customers, and we had him be part of that effort, and he mentioned it several times in those discussions. He's excited about it, and I think we all ought to be excited about it. I think we have some opportunities here. We did not think we had opportunities to get the ethanol industry to be what it is when we started with the RFS and advocating for that 20 years ago. Look what happened. I have every reason to think that we could have similar opportunities, economic opportunities, with climate change if we do it right.
Yeah, and to build on what John just said, I remember reporting in the late 70s on the gasohol days, remember? And it just didn't work out. But we learned valuable lessons on structure, how to build a plant more efficiently. Jeff Broing came in and helped revolutionize the industry. So yeah, you got to go out on a limb sometimes and not a twig, and that's what the ethanol industry learned. Creating at the beginning, it used a lot of water, and now it's using 65 to 70% less water consumption. I mean, that's progress. So as John first said, the technology in agriculture is just unbelievable, and so that's going to aid this process. We learned a lot of lessons in the climate change arena. Again, the last time it was pushed. So now we're going to go to the modern era. So let's hope that there's opportunities. You said the right word. Let's hope there's opportunities for the ag sector.
And the other thing, the other lesson we learned in the ethanol discussion and what happened after the first and then even more so the second RFS, those plants a lot of them were farmer owned. Almost all of them were in small rural communities.
Yes.
That's important. It's important for so many reasons. It's important economically. It's important politically, and the embrace that we've seen of the ethanol industry, and including from our friends in the livestock industry, has been really significant. But I think a lot of it is because those plants were put in the right places.
Yeah, and look at the success of DDGs now. When they first came out, it was a cast-off, right, product. Now it's a good alternative when soybean meal prices get too high. And again, to echo what you said, John, in the early days of the ethanol, it gave more than a few farmers who invested with the shares cash flow because they doubled, tripled, or whatever their money. I don't forget things like that.
Yeah, and what's been interesting is I got a call from my good friend Chandler Keys, who used to run the DC shop for the cattlemen and has been working for JBS for a number of years. He called me up and said, "Doggett, we need to talk about ethanol." I thought, God, we've had this discussion, Chandler. I don't want to talk about it anymore. He said, "No, you got to get these plants back open." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because our plants have converted over to stunning and chilling hogs with the CO2 out of ethanol plants, and you guys got to get them open right now."
Yeah.
What a great deal that is.
And we know, Chandler, if you know, that's a
Yes.
major development.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a stunning twist that we've seen some of these ethanol plants where the ethanol has become a secondary product because not only because of price, but because of some of these other demands.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
This is great. Yeah.
Let's turn to some of the questions and comments coming in. First of all, Margot, thank you so much for the kind comments about our discussion here. I greatly appreciate that. Let's go to Michael, who says, "I don't see $15 soybeans is going to be good, is going to hurt the livestock feeding industry, clear to the grocery store." And I think we all agree on here that there is a range where if we hit on both cattle and soybean prices, it's not good for anybody in the long term because of those issues and challenges to the livestock industry.
Yeah, but the farmer market reporter in me tells me to look back, and there was an opportunity for livestock producers and hog producers and dairy producers to buy, quote, a lot cheaper feed grains, okay, and soy meal. Yes, I would echo what the caller said. Had there not been the opportunity, that's when you don't have any choices. But I think let the good times roll from the producer for right now, because I think we're demand rationing right now in the soybean complex. It's going to go pretty quick, and we're seeing it to a degree in the corn, John. But we're going to have battle for acres, this year, and boy, we haven't heard that for a while. So it'll work itself out. The market has a way. I don't think we're in the Bitcoin arena yet in the in the commodities. But again, I want to put that perspective. There was an opportunity. There's that word again, to lay off some feed cost. And if that opportunity was not taken, so be it.
The solution to $15 beans is $15 beans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You'll get those plantings. You'll go up 7 million acres in soybeans this year. I mean, that's what the numbers are showing right now, and maybe 2 million, up to 2 million acres more corn, and that's when then it'll settle itself out in 18 months.
Yeah, and John, as CEO of the National Corn Growers, you have to have a sly smile on your face when you see beans out there trying to price in some acres, because that means that there's going to be a price advantage for some corn acres.
Gladdens my heart. It is so nice seeing some places where there's a 5 in front of that corn price instead of a 2.
Yeah, blip there briefly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had a farmer call me before Christmas complaining about the prices, and I said, "What's wrong with the prices? Prices are pretty darn good." He said, "Well, they weren't when I sold them back in March and April."
There's
I'm
always
sorry.
new crop. There's always new crop,
that's right.
right? To lay it off. To such a degree, there was, a few weeks, on December 21st, the Congressional Research Service put out very interesting report, controversial now, raising questions of whether or not farmers even needed that CFAP 3 or whatever you want to call that payment. But boy, I heard from farmers saying cash flow problems do not go away that fast, since we've had a dramatic drain in working capital since the peak in 2012. But so, that's perspective as well. But I was surprised to see that type of report coming out of the Congressional Research Service. Not that they shouldn't raise questions, but boy, they almost got into borderline, suggestions there. But again, when you talk to farmers who have been receiving those much needed, cash flow, payments, they're not saying to and out, for sure.
Well, that brings a good question for you, John, in that now 2021 is going to bring a form of CFAP payment because of this latest disaster aid package. But it is unlikely that there will be any sort of ad hoc payments going into the rest of 2021, whereas those ad hoc payments made, according to USDA, 36% of farm income in 2020. So certainly improved market prices are going to pick up some of that, but not all of that. So how do corn growers adjust to this new reality in 2021?
Well, so many of these payments were based either on the trade disruptions or COVID. Both of those are, the trade issue is behind us. Our markets have not been significantly, or are not now significantly being affected by COVID. So that's going to be hard to make that tie. Farmers say, we want more payments, but for what reason? And so that's a question we have to answer. The other thing is, let's not forget, we have a very, very robust Title I in the Farm Bill, and we have very good options with crop insurance. Those things are still there. They didn't go away. And so, we need to examine the efficacy of those programs as we start getting ready for the next Farm Bill. But I don't know that we're going to see continued big payments to agriculture. Hopefully $15 beans and $5 corn will make a cash flow for folks to keep in business. I would think they could.
I would think so. Yeah. Let's hope we get there. Question from Mary for you, Jim. Any updates on PPD reform or dairy pricing before the next Farm Bill, or will the new formula be better in 2021 as the country gets back to normal?
I think the formula will be better. Collin Peterson really helped the dairy industry in the last Farm Bill, his parting gift to the dairy sector. That's one of the better programs right now, in my judgment, that it gives at least the opportunity for a certain sector of that dairy industry, the smaller to maybe medium size producers. So I think the safety net is never totally adequate, but it's much better than it ever was during my first 40 years, watching, farm policy. And so now we just have to get more markets opened up. And that's, ties into the COVID because the dairy, the food box program definitely is helping and will continue to help with the recent, I think, $1.5 billion, program, but also to get these COVID vaccines implemented, distributed, and the jabs put in, because that'll begin to open up the food establishments and the schools, etc., traveling, restaurants, and that we saw, much like John said in Chandler Keyes and the interrelationships with the ethanol industry on what they needed the CO2, we're seeing the significant relationship to the food, system to dairy. To edible, dry edible beans, to dairy, products. So that's all in an upbeat pattern, at least during the last 6 months of this year. You can project that we're going to have a pretty good demand pull markets almost across the board. We're seeing it in corn now. We're seeing it in soybeans relative to problems in South America. and even in wheat, as not just a tag along, because Russia's had some problems, Ukraine, etc., but also in the meat sector, because China still is importing the beef and pork. So you'll give me a demand pull market any day, and that's what we're seeing this calendar year. It's not a 1 month phenomena this year.
All right, John, I'm sure you're just dying to dive in on dairy policy and dairy pricing, aren't you?
We love dairy cows. They eat corn.
There you go.
And
There you
there's
go.
a
Well,
cow in every state, right?
Yeah.
So it's got a lot of clout.
all right, last item on my list, gentlemen, is when the new Congress comes back in after the new president has been sworn in. One of the top issues taken up is going to be expanding those stimulus checks from $600 to $2,000. Which means another stimulus package. Is there anything that agriculture is going to be pushing for in that expanded stimulus package? Start with you, Jim.
Oh, I want to start with John.
Well, let's start with John. Anything?
Well, I asked different lobbyists that question this morning, and they said they didn't think so, unless maybe Stabenow wants to put in her climate change language bill. This time. That's really the answer I got. I guess my question would be really, if it includes billions of dollars for the state governments such as New York, California, and New Jersey, Senator Manchin has already said he won't vote for that. And if it includes that, will they get many to any Republicans? So that could throw it up into the uncertainty, which I wouldn't have thought just a few hours ago. So I don't know whether we have that in like Flint now that we thought earlier this week. John?
I think that the state and local government's needs are pretty significant. My dad was a county commissioner in central Montana for a long time. There's only so much tax base you have, and you take small communities like that and around the country, it's been pretty tough. How'd you like to be in a small community with a hospital that has 10 beds? I'll make you bet that they're in real trouble right now. Yeah. We need those hospitals in rural America, and if we don't get some relief for some of those small towns, those counties, those states, it'll affect a lot of people, and I think agriculture probably is much more than others.
Now that's a targeted approach, and I think you would see widespread support for something like that. It gets into that sensitive issue when some people say that you're bailing out spending in New York City and Chicago and New Jersey.
Yeah, you're bailing out Illinois pensions, right, Jim?
Yeah, and so that gets you into this like area. But I agree totally with John. When you start doing targeted approach, and that's what really this town should be doing more, then it makes sense. And rural sector definitely needs it. What with not only the COVID vaccine, the availability of doctors, the actual where the offices are for doctors, hospitals, etc. Definitely that is needed.
Yeah, but Jim, as we all know, all three of us here on this call right now, Washington, D.C. right now is not a town that has the time or the finesse for a targeted approach.
No, but I think it's eventually going to have to happen. It will, and we'll see. We're going to see the return. I just don't know when. I think we have to go through the timeline of Trump leaving. You're going to see next week the House. It looks like the odds now favor that they're going to file impeachment papers Monday already, and they could impeach him. But I think that's the bitterness of this of some House Democrats. I don't see the Senate going along because you need 2/3 of the vote. But sooner or later we're going to get back to what Reagan. I think, John, you said you came in when Reagan was in. He said the line I'll never forget: revenge is an emotion, not a policy. And both parties should heed that. And eventually we'll get back there, because the events this week told us that we have to have more than a midterm correction. We have to rethink some of the horrible, bitter, viral attitudes we have, from all camps. And so, let's be done with it. This thing's, being tired. Let's get to that middle ground, like John said, because it's out there. The middle ground is out there. They're just not being heard.
Jim, I'm going to. Oh, go ahead, John.
Well, I tell folks all the time, if a candidate's running and saying, I don't know anything about Washington, I'm completely ignorant about it, and I'm going to go to Washington and fight.
Yeah.
And then people say, I don't understand why Washington can't get anything done, because you send a bunch of stupid knuckleheads that don't know how to listen, instead all want to fight.
Yeah.
It's on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I want, what I've suggested, I've had candidates call me over the years. I said, if you represent a rural district, go to Washington, sit down, shut up, and listen to what somebody from an urban district, somebody from a suburban district, what's going on with their constituents? What are the important things to them? You might find out that you have some common things, and then you're going to have an opportunity to talk about your rural district. But if you go in there and sit back in the corner and yell and scream, you're not effectively representing your constituents. The problem in Washington does not start in Washington. It starts in America, the rest of America, because we are sending these knuckleheads to Washington and expecting them to get something done.
Yeah. Indeed. In fact, Margot's there applauding you on comments too, and I'll applaud you as well, John. And Jim, before we go, I'm gonna take some issue with one thing you said. I do agree that what is driving the impeachment effort is vengeance, and that is wrong. I will say, however, that the events that took place Wednesday are so horrific, were such an attack on the Constitution of the United States. There needs to be some significant response to that. And quite frankly, impeachment and proceedings and barring Trump from ever running for president again are the only mechanism that we have at our disposal at this moment.
It's an impeachable offense. But again, the timeline, we have 12 days, And again, just from a religiosity standpoint, Trump may have treated, he treated his opponents viscerally, okay? But that doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. We have 12 days. 12 days. Most common people will say, well, make sure that he doesn't do anything really bad, But
and there does seem to be efforts. Yeah, there seem to be efforts underway today to make sure that doesn't happen. You saw the statements from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Speaker Pelosi about their discussion of making sure the safeguards on the nuclear arsenal.
Yes, and that should be. That makes sense. That makes sense. But again, it just plays into the hands of emotions to go through the process again, where it brings up the politics of it. Does Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker Pelosi, just want to see Trump impeached twice because no other president has been impeached twice? It just raises all these issues again.
Well, but then what other mechanism is there to fully repudiate the actions that were taken Wednesday?
You look at Trump the last few days, and it's been so unlike Trump. He's not only demoralized, which he should be, he's caved in under support. He has lost many of the establishment Republicans, etc.
But that is not the Organization of the United States of America repudiating what took place. And
so
I think
you would want to see
happen.
him actually impeached in 12 days. In 12 days.
Well, not necessarily in 12 days. Again, to me, I feel somewhat satisfied in what I've seen today that the capability for him to take action against the United States has been marginalized. Or I should say take action against the United States again. But I think that there needs, and I don't think that he needs to necessarily be removed from office in 12 days, because that's a huge hill to climb. But I do think that there needs to be a public repudiation from the Organization of the United States in whatever form that is.
It could be
repudiation of what took place.
A censure vote could be.
Censure vote, but a censure vote still doesn't block him from running again.
It was interesting yesterday, a voice of moderation and of restraint was Josh Bolten, of all people. I mean, if Josh Bolten said, first do no harm, and you could make this worse, by impeaching him or invoking the 25th Amendment. Yeah. And so when Josh Bolten is your voice of moderation and reason, that's something else.
That is. But the point I was trying to get to there is that doesn't necessarily have to be done in the 12 days. That process can still play out after the next 12 days.
There's no right answer. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, it's an ugly situation. Just ugly situation.
It is an ugly situation.
Over with.
But we've got a bright week ahead of us. So Jim, as always, and John, be thinking as I come to you next on this, where are you looking for signal over the noise next week? It may be hard to find signal over all the noise we're going to get next week. But where are you going to be looking for? Well, the
signal's coming into next week. Yeah, you want to see. You want the remaining cabinet people especially in the security areas, to stay on the job. So I'll be looking at that. 2 is I will be looking at to see if Trump stays, demoted, if you will. Hopefully he will. 3rd is I think we're just in the marketplace. We're in a really bullish market, so we're going to get those
which is just unbelievable.
Yeah, we're going to get those USDA reports on the 12th, I guess, and it should show a declining carryover and squeezy tight stocks to use for soybeans. And John, you may want to tell your friend who sold corn early, he may want to blame that on USDA for having very unrealistic estimates early on of China's corn demand. So I've been shouting that for months, and I don't like being negative to USDA, but I think the World Board let down the ag sector big time, and they should have more adequately forecast the demand pull markets that we're seeing right now, because a lot of people did. But that's what I'll be looking at in the week ahead.
Well, that was going to be my first question to John was in this segment is, are we going to see a realistic number from the World Board on China come Tuesday?
On corn, China.
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you. You're the corn guy. Come
on. Define reasonable.
Just
something that falls in line with the export reports we've already had.
Well, people have long complained about these government numbers, and they always will. It's just part of agriculture. I mean, it's ingrained in the DNA. But there's been some mistakes made and some things that have not gone the right way, and we all need to work on those in times to come. And I'm hoping that the Secretary Vilsack can deal with some of that, because we have way too many people now not trusting these numbers at all.
Yeah. Now, Seth Meyer is coming in as the chief economist, and I know he must be in town because I got his old email at FAPRI returned. So that tells me, and it's USDA email, he said, for the replacement. And Seth is a good guy. He used to be over the World Board. So I think that's another good development that I see, because Seth knows the operations, and he's going to work very closely with incoming Secretary Vilsack. So that's another plus. So maybe he can find out some of the oddities that I've seen and others going on at the World Board. They're just not up to snuff anymore.
Well, in fact, I'll tell you, Jim, been talking to Seth today. He is going to be talking with us Tuesday afternoon after the reports come out, and we will have comments from Seth Meyer later Tuesday afternoon after the reports come out. And maybe even from, when his name's escaping me, the chairman of the World Board. We may be talking with him next week as well.
Jackanoski.
On AgriTalk.
I used to work with him. He's a good guy.
Yeah. So we may get some deeper insight to that. All right. John, where else are you looking for signal in the coming week?
First, I hope the president stays calm, stays quiet, and doesn't do anything else that will create a problem for the country. And I think that the folks that are still in the cabinet are going to be working on that. And I'm like Jim, the national security folks, I think, are very committed to making sure that something crazy doesn't happen. Secondly, I think the other thing I'm looking for next week is, are we going to start getting this vaccine rollout we're way, way, way behind. We need to get these vaccines in arms as soon as we possibly can. I'm hoping that, a lot of these bugs and a lot of these systems, and they're local bugs, I'm hoping that they get worked out and we get vaccines in arms. Nothing else is going to happen in this country until we defeat COVID. We have to defeat COVID. And, I had another person I know pass away last week from this. We lost 4,000 people yesterday. We are in a horrible place on this. We have to conquer the pandemic.
John, before we leave, I wanted to ask you, something popped up on my screen here. EPA Administrator Wheeler is going to make an ag announcement in Mississippi Monday with Senator Hyde Smith, state officials, and the Mississippi Farm Bureau president. Do you know anything about this? I hate to break this on you. I don't know. Is that dicamba or, I don't know.
It might be dicamba, but boy, I'd hate to speculate, Jim.
Okay.
All right.
Anyway, that's late breaking news. We're going
late breaking news.
I'll have to look at that Monday. Why is he going down there and what they're going to announce? Okay.
All right. So watch for Jim Wiesmeyer's newsletter over the weekend and see what the late breaking news is on that. With that, gentlemen, thank you so much. First of all, John Doggett, I really appreciate you making the time. I hope you'll join us again on this sometime.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed this and would love to do it. And we'll see what happens. But it's, we're in a new year. There's hope. There's opportunity. We live in the greatest country in the world. We've had a tough week. We've had tough weeks in this country before. But we're Americans, and we're going to work to have the best democracy that we possibly can. And that starts with us. That doesn't start in Washington, D.C. That starts with us in our own homes and our own communities.
Great message. And John, don't wait for us to call us if we got something you want to talk about. Or don't wait for us to call you if you got something to talk about. Call
Absolutely.
us. Jim, as always, great insight. We appreciate it. And we'll be watching the newsletter over the weekend.
Thanks, John.
All right.
Thanks,
that
guys.
wraps it up for this week's edition of DC Signal to Noise.